Wow, so that introduction is not at all intimidating. I'm afraid I am probably less exciting than that intro may have possibly had you believe. Welcome all and thank you for joining us today. You will notice that I am not Adam. Unfortunately, he's had a last-minute emergency, so he was unable to join us. So I'm afraid you'll all need to prepare yourselves because you're going to be hearing a lot of my voice, because not only am I chairing both sessions, but I'm also speaking in this morning in the first part of the session as well. Thankfully, I'm also joined by an excellent panel of speakers. So welcome. Today we're talking about the net zero transition and engaging and supporting low-income households in the low-carbon journey. We are really excited to have so many of you join us today. It's been tremendous that we sold out on Zoom, and we're also running this live on YouTube as well. I think we all recognise that the journey to achieving net zero is a major challenge ahead, particularly for low-income and vulnerable consumers, but we also recognise that it's a huge opportunity if we get it right. So during today's webinar, we hope to set out some of NEA's policy recommendations, share practical insights from some of our field trials, hear from our exciting panel of speakers about some of the challenges from their perspective and some of the solutions that they're using to engage with customers, and ultimately ensure that we can effectively engage and support customers so nobody is left behind through the transition. This is only a short webinar, and this is a huge subject area, as no doubt all of you will appreciate. We know there's not going to be time to cover everything, but we've tried to pull out some key areas of insight, and we want to continue this discussion over the coming months. We will probably create more questions and answers today, but with the support of our members and all of you on the call today, we hope to continue the discussion much more widely. We will be inviting our members to quarterly events, and it's probably a timely point to mention that we now have a new free membership offer for supporting members, and information on that will be circulated after the event. And we would really encourage people to consider that as an option, particularly given that for supported members, for not-for-profits, it's now a free membership. We are much stronger in our voice if we have a broad membership, understanding all of your insights and channeling in all of those insights to influence change and influence best practice. We'll also continue to make decarbonisation and a fair transition a priority for many of our open event series, and really welcome, off the back of today, kind of key areas that you would like us to focus on. I wanted to introduce you to our exciting panel of speakers today. First up, you have Matt Copeland, who is NEA's policy manager. He works with governments, regulators and other organisations to ensure that the energy market is fair for fuel-poor customers and vulnerable households. He's got 10 years experience in the energy sector, working on sustainability issues and obviously working with NEA on fuel poverty issues for the last 3 years. And in that time, he's worked on a number of key policy areas relevant to the discussion today, and most recently been supporting the North East and Yorkshire and Humber Energy Hub in the delivery of their Green Homes grant schemes. We also have Chris Ablett, the Customer Experience Manager from Zero, based in Wales. So Chris's role at Zero is to take care of the customer with a reputation for improving service by engaging and empowering people to do the right thing. Zero's focus is very much on building zero carbon homes for future generations. We also are joined by Will Ray, Head of Sustainability at Clarion Housing Group. Will is Head of Sustainability for Clarion and leads the development and implementation of their sustainability strategy. He's got over 20 years experience of sustainability, low carbon buildings, market transformation internationally, from designing low carbon retrofit programs and installing measures through to developing sustainable energy strategies. We do have the Q&A function running, so if you've got any questions, please channel them in through the course of the session, and we will hope to get to as many as we can. It's unlikely we'll be able to answer all questions today, but what we will endeavour to do is try to circulate answers to questions that we've not been able to get to afterwards. I make no promises that we'll be able to answer 100% of everything, but we will absolutely do our best. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matt Copeland to start with the setting the policy context to today's session.
Thanks, Danny. As Danny said, I'm Matt Copeland. I'm going to be talking about some of the policy context for today, taking you through some of our initial views of what needs to be done in terms of policy to achieve a fair transition to net zero. And before I get started, I just want to say how good it is to be able to speak at an event where we're not focusing on necessarily the technology, but able to talk about the people element of decarbonisation. First and foremost, because I think it's something that is often missed in this discussion. And I think it's a fair question to ask to begin with. why is a fuel poverty charity talking about net zero? And I think that is a fair question, but I'll try and answer it briefly. The definitions of fuel poverty do vary across the nations, but it consistently captures lower income homes with high energy costs. And that implies that fuel poor homes often live in inefficient buildings with some of the highest emissions. So they have some of the highest potential for tackling those emissions in increasing the efficiency of those homes. So in our view, tackling fuel poverty is absolutely crucial to meeting net zero. And this view is shared by governments across the UK as well, with fuel poverty strategies being part of broader decarbonisation strategies, but also fuel poverty in England and elsewhere forming a key part of achieving a just transition in the overall policy framework. And something I really want to consider today is what household characteristics the policymakers need to consider in order to get to the right place to achieve a fair transition. Now, I've put 8 things up on the screen here, and this isn't everything that they need to consider, but these are 8 really important things from our point of view. Firstly, the energy efficiency levels of the home will determine what might need to be done to a home in order to make it more efficient. The heating type of homes can have a massive impact on what could be done to decarbonise them, whether it's electric or gas or oil. How a household pays for their energy, whether it's credit or prepayment, might determine what works best for them. Whether a household has a disability or a medical condition can determine what temperature they need to keep their home at, which might change the options available to them. If a household is digitally excluded, they might not be able to interact with some of the smart devices that could help reduce costs, and there needs to be solutions for everyone. Tenure is incredibly important. If a household is in the private rented sector, they might have different options to a household that owns their home. The language someone speaks can have a massive impact on how they interact with the energy market. And rurality is often a combination of these things and can make it much more difficult to upgrade your home. All of these things need to be considered throughout policymaking to ensure that everyone can fairly decarbonise their home. And whilst we need to consider at a household level and those different types of households, there are some big challenges that policy should consider across those. So if you're fuel poor households, it's often thought that just looking at upfront costs or just looking at subsidising running costs is enough. But actually, an increase in either can have a massive impact on the affordability of energy, just general affordability for those households. So both upfront costs and running costs need to be are an issue, a barrier to low-income households upgrading their homes. Disruption and upheaval of the home can be a significant barrier, disproportionately high barrier for low-income households who often live in smaller homes. And this can be quite a big disruption if changing heating technology and having to change radiators, for example. There's very little advice in England and Wales, although there's a new pilot in Wales, and advice is crucial to getting the right outcomes. Changing behaviours is really difficult, and we all do need to change behaviours in order to meet net zero. I don't think as a society we understand the scope, the scale of that and how to do it yet. It's a massive barrier. The lack of consumer protection outside of electricity and gas, particularly thinking about district heating, could create issues. And in general, a lack of understanding, capacity and knowledge in decarbonising heating. I don't think we really understand as a society what the best solution is yet. And we need to be able to build our understanding, capacity, knowledge and communicate that with others. So some huge challenges. And before I look at some of the things that NEA wants to do with policy and what NEA wants governments to do with policy, it's worth looking at previous policies and seeing where they might have come into some pitfalls. So firstly, Eco3. We think that did not adequately address rural households. It does have a rural element to it, but we think that actually it doesn't look at most rural households, partially because of the way it's funded and doesn't allow for enough funding for those households. And it allows household contributions, which can be a blocker for low-income households in accessing the scheme. The renewable heat incentive which was a subsidy for the ongoing costs of heat pumps and other low carbon technologies, wasn't ring-fenced for fuel poor households, and there were no upfront costs. So although it did help many households, actually it was largely middle and upper income households that were able to benefit from that. The feed-in tariff, very similar to the RHI and how it's set up, not accessible for fuel poor households. But in addition to that, it was recovered through energy bills. So a very regressive way of recovering those costs. The Green Homes Grant is ongoing, and particularly the voucher system is very, very complex. And the short-term delivery makes it very difficult for both households to have the confidence, but also the supply chain. And over to Wales, the Nest scheme has been really successful in replacing boilers, which is incredibly important for fuel poor households. In terms of decarbonising, has a poor rural reach due to its low cap, and historically hasn't been fabric first. So lots of pitfalls to learn from in order to get the best out of new schemes that could be coming up. And we think that policymakers should focus on these high-level principles, particularly when we're thinking about decarbonising heat. What we think isn't limited to what's on this slide, but these are some of the really big ticket things we want governments to think about. Firstly, with funding mechanisms. We want funding mechanisms to decarbonise heat to be fabric first, so to focus on energy efficiency before anything else. But when they do look at heating technologies, households may need upfront and running cost support. But overall, we think that government support needs to focus on fuel quality first, and fuel poor homes should be supported to get the benefits of decarbonisation for other homes. Distributional impacts of policies, of every policy that the government comes up with to decarbonise homes, are really important. And they need to understand and mitigate the impacts of each policy when we're thinking about those 8 household characteristic types that we talked about earlier. And they need to do this retrospectively as well. So for legacy coal users who now can't use their former form of heating because they've been regulated out of the market, they need help to upgrade their homes. And that will happen again in the future with different heating types, we suspect, as well. We talked about advice and protections, and we need a framework for advice. We need to regulate heat in general, and we need to assess the extent of infrastructural change in the house to make sure that people aren't left worse off as a result of heating changes. And we need a whole systems approach. The energy networks can have a massive role in all of this, and we need to understand behavioural change as well. And it's worth, I'm going to leave you with what's coming up in terms of some big policy risks and what's coming up in terms of opportunities to influence. So of 3 sort of big things that are coming up that need to be thought about. Firstly, the green gas levy, and the government has now announced that there will be a levy on bills to subsidise green gas. It will be on a gas bill, and it will be a flat rate on all gas bills, all meters, whether you're a fuel poor household with a low usage or a factory, and just the broader levy design. That's a huge risk for fuel poor households, especially those who use gas, because there's a sort of intention by some people to move lots of levies onto the gas bill. And the way that that's designed can have a huge impact on those household types that we talked about earlier, and that needs to be really thought about. People are talking about a carbon tax on gas, similar to levies. That could have a profound impact on people. And we need to think about how we use that tax money to help fuel poor households to decarbonise. And there's going to be an end to statutory price protection, so the price cap will end in 2023, removing some protections for households in terms of energy prices. There's big opportunities to influence. The heat and building strategy coming up, Eco4 coming up, which could be improved from Eco3, and a successor to the renewable peace incentive, which we hope will be better for fuel poor households. I was going to leave you on one thing. It would be BEIS's affordability review, looking at levy design in the future and ensuring that levies that pay for decarbonisation are as fair as possible. And we want to make sure that the quantum on bills is as low as possible, that it's fairly attributed on bills, so it's based on usage rather than a flat rate. And we want to make sure as well that anything that levies pays for primarily goes towards helping fuel poor households decarbonise. That's a really whistle-stop tour of what NEA is thinking about in terms of decarbonising heat and net zero. But I'll hand back to Danny to move on with the webinar.
Fantastic, thank you, Matt. That's a really helpful kind of introduction. Unsurprisingly, some of what I'm going to touch on in a moment around some of the practical challenges will overlap with some of the introduction there on kind of practical challenges in people's homes. I'm going to hopefully keep myself to time as chair, so I'm going to actually set a little stopwatch alongside me so I don't overrun. So bear with me a moment while I share my screen. This is where the two roles ever so slightly clash. Can my colleagues on Teams tell me that I've shared properly? Hopefully I have. So as you know, I'm Danny Barnes, as mentioned earlier. I am one of the director of operations. I work very closely alongside my colleague Peter Sunby, and we head up our operations directorate, which leads on all of our practical delivery projects. What my role leads on skills standards, innovation and demonstration projects, which includes NEA's training. You'll be hearing from our training and assessment manager Chris in session 2, and also from today's session I'm going to talk through some of the insights and the work of our innovation and technical evaluation team, which is headed up by my colleague Michael Hamer. So I'm planning to spend the next 20 minutes sharing our thoughts about some of the practical challenges, some of the insights from our technical evaluation fieldwork, and what we consider to be some of the kind of pillars of best practice to support low income and vulnerable consumers. The team have decades of experience facilitating and managing field trials in live settings in people's homes, looking at various energy efficiency technologies, specifically focused on how to optimise benefits for fuel poor customers ultimately. They work to understand the impacts of measures and interventions on comfort, on affordability, controllability, and make recommendations to enhance outcomes for low income and vulnerable consumers. We work both with manufacturers to kind of look at claims about products around sort of efficiencies, but also with housing providers and other partners to better understand what might be the preferred option in terms of intervention for their residents and what might have the most impact, but also to measure success and impact of retrofit programmes. We're often also or occasionally brought in to look at what might have gone wrong, so where there have maybe been a retrofit scheme, and to understand where there's resident dissatisfaction and what could have been the kind of primary reason for that. The slides set out here what we cover within the team, but just to say we are a research and dissemination organisation. We try to act independent, well, we always act independently, and we try to share our insights as widely as possible. It's part of the reason for today's session, but we also host all of our reports on our website, and I will be talking about a couple of trials today where the links to the reports is embedded within the slides when they are shared. Critically, we adopt a person-centred approach to everything we do, and I think that's really, really important and kind of a real key attribute of what the team deliver in practice. It's not lab settings, it's not optimised settings, it's real human engagement with energy efficiency measures. So just to take us back to basics, and I appreciate some of this may seem like I'm trying to teach people to suck eggs, but I promise you I'm not. I just think it's really important that we set some context of why this discussion is so critical. Vulnerability and vulnerable situations affect millions of people across the UK. The slide just sets out just a few of those potential vulnerabilities that people might be struggling with and hoping to try and tackle. We've got over 4 million people living in fuel poverty, struggling to afford to heat their home. 1 in 6 people affected by hearing loss, making it potentially more difficult to interpret information and be able to communicate on the phone, or potentially more difficult to engage even online because of potential language barriers. For example, profoundly deaf people may communicate in British Sign Language. It's a completely different language to written English, and it's really important that we recognise and appreciate that. 15 million people living with long-term health conditions, and 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health problem each year. It's also really important to recognise that not everybody is digitally excluded. We still see that assumption being made in many of our trials. So why is any of this relevant? So vulnerability doesn't just affect a few people, it affects millions of us. Every single person on this call may have either experienced a vulnerability themselves or know somebody who has. We know we're facing a mental health crisis as a result of the pandemic and the greatest financial uncertainty we've known for decades. And people who are reliant on a low income will often be adopting coping strategies, such as only having the heating on first thing in the morning before the children go out to school, or perhaps only heating one room. And whilst we absolutely do not endorse those coping strategies, they are the heartbreaking reality of what is happening in practice. So any new heating system needs to be able to be responsive to some of those potential coping strategies to manage the household's income. The reality of the potential detriment of getting this wrong for our client group is paying more when they can ill afford to, so potentially accruing more debt, or going without heating or hot water, exacerbating health conditions, or absolute worst case, considering becoming another excess into death statistic. I will become more optimistic in a moment, I do promise you, but I am going to touch on challenges first and foremost, and then talk through why we see this as an opportunity. So before I touch on the challenges, I just wanted to note that a lot of the challenges that we're going to talk to fall out of the insights from our trials, and I just wanted to just reference some common pitfalls that we see. As I mentioned earlier, we aren't only brought in as an evaluation partner from the outset of the programme, we're often also brought in to diagnose when things might have gone wrong after perhaps a retrofit programme has been completed. Sometimes it's as simple to kind of diagnose that residents haven't either been properly engaged or they've not understood the technology, and some simple hand-holding around behaviour change and understanding controls will resolve some of the challenges in the resident satisfaction. Easier to remedy, frustrating that it's happened, but easier to remedy. However, all too often it can also be down to the product. So mistakes made at product selection stage, so perhaps thinking about broadband availability, particularly smarter technologies, as I mentioned earlier, there is still an assumption that everybody is digitally included. If you're talking about somebody on a low income, they may not actually be able to afford broadband in their home, or there may be limited connectivity within the home. So sometimes smart technologies can't be utilised. Often we see complex controls which can't be properly used by customers, maybe because they've got a dexterity issue, or perhaps because they're just too complex to actually understand in practice. And sometimes we see inappropriate technologies. So for example, the sizing of the system doesn't match up with the consumption needs, or there's not been a recognition of the need to resolve the space heating requirements prior to putting in heating systems. So what are the challenges? Well, I've set them out on the screen here. There's the breadth and complexity of options. I assume that's probably why so many are on the call today. We know that this is a confusing landscape. We know that it is difficult, and customers know that too. Consumer confidence and acceptance is quite low currently, I would say. For our client group, of course, there is an upfront cost, not only of the heating system, but potentially wider whole house retrofit costs, and we need substantial investment, which is obviously touched upon by Matt just before. There's also potential risk of increased cost of supply. We know that currently the cost of gas is lower than for electricity, and this is where whole house retrofit, but also benefit aggregation and time of use will prove vital. And obviously I know Matt touched on that just now. We also need to recognise that there's disruption in the home. So why is this really important for our client group? Well, you might be talking about a customer who is working all the hours God sends, but still struggling on the poverty line. Not so easy to take time off work to have an installation in their property, or somebody with a mental health condition who would find it quite unsettling to have strangers in their home. These are all things that we need to recognise when engaging with clients. We're going to talk about the skills gaps. I'm not going to touch on that in too much detail now because that will be talked about in session 2. There's also limited independent advice provision currently available for customers to make informed choices. We've talked about the complexity of the options, but making an informed choice is more difficult. The extent of involvement, so often our clients might be living in private rented property, and therefore the landlord may not have the needs or requirements of the tenant at their heart, so they're not often always the decision maker. We've talked about controllability and usability of the technology potentially creating a boundary, and accessibility of literature. We often see literature which is very, very complex, trying to articulate very complex information in a very complex way. We would like to see more literature in a more accessible way, things like videos as well as written content, and also translated into additional languages where possible. I've talked about connectivity, and also we will talk about ongoing protections when I talk about recommendations. I'm just going to move on to opportunities, and hopefully a slightly more lighter note now. And apologies, I spent so long on challenges, but I think it is really important that we set that context up front. So ultimately, energy efficiency runs to the heart of both decarbonisation and fuel poverty. We've always advocated for energy efficiency as the most sustainable solution to fuel poverty, and we know that it is a central theme of fuel poverty strategies across the UK. The challenge for us, as we see it, is making sure that the most in need households receive that support the soonest. Whole house retrofit ultimately helps everybody. Looking at fabric first, considering insulation, it's a no regrets path. we have quite literally had residents in tears from simply having proper insulation on their homes. So we know that it improves the efficiency of the home, ultimately helps the system, the heating system within the home, operate more efficiently, and reduces the costs of keeping warm. So that's a very much no regrets path. Innovation is constantly evolving. So we will see innovation is absolutely going to play a part, and it's fundamental in potentially helping customers. We will see enhanced accessibility options and inclusivity options as a result of innovation. We also believe that decarbonising heat, it is a challenge, and it's going to require more than just centralised engagement. Communities and other local actors will have a huge part to play. And although this isn't a foregone conclusion, this level of engagement will hopefully lead to a significant number of opportunities to engage, advise, reassure, and improve the lives of households. There's the opportunity to cross-refer between other policy instruments, so much the same as the smart meter rollout. There is a unique opportunity to re-engage with customers at scale across the country, better understanding individuals, better understanding whether they're eligible for the priority services register or other schemes that they could benefit from, and we can engage people in energy. And ultimately, we will see a growth in independent advice over the coming years. We have to, otherwise it's not going to work. So I wanted to provide just a couple of insights into some of our trials. As I mentioned, the reports are available on our website and the links are within the titles. But these just help demonstrate, I feel, that when done well, retrofit and low carbon installations can be life-changing for fuel poor customers. So the first one is a project that we did under our technical innovation programme, which many of you may remember from was a 3-year programme back in 2016 to 2019, a multi-million pound programme that NEA led on, working very closely with our partners across the country. So it was a whole house approach. Whilst it was off gas, it was rural and they were inefficient properties. It was a hybrid of air source heat pumps and solar PVT. Insulation works had already been completed prior to the installation of the heating system, and the replacements were for solid fuel back boilers and old electric storage heating systems. The conclusions, perhaps unsurprisingly, was significant reduction in household energy use. There was 20% savings for solid fuel customers and up to 30% savings for those on electric storage heaters. And this was a really key example of engagement working well. When we first engaged with the residents, particularly those with solid fuel back boilers, they were very reticent, anti the systems, in part because they loved having that burst of heat in their front room, even though the rest of their home was freezing cold. And 6-9 months on, when they saw the costs coming down, their whole home was warm rather than just one room very, very hot, they were delighted. And so it was a real substantial shift in how that consumer acceptance can change ultimately. So that's that's why I wanted to kind of touch on that today. We also worked with North Devon Homes on a really innovative project around battery storage. So it was the first of its kind to trial off-peak charging without solar PV specifically. So they would charge you utilising time of use tariff. The battery would charge up when prices were high and discharge when prices were low. It was a part of a soft rollout for this feature on part of the Tesla batteries. The users were mostly medium and high users due to chronic health conditions, but you'll see on the slide there the savings were absolutely remarkable. And whilst we recognise that the payback time for battery storage in domestic settings is higher, we see that there is some potential to aggregate benefits of wider system benefits. So, for example, utilising time of use, demand side response, and savings to grid services as well. We could aggregate up those benefits and potentially utilise those to offset cost to consumers. Appreciate that that's a potential and perhaps maybe a bit of blue, sort of rose-coloured glasses, but it's something that we absolutely see the potential to help support and support with these kind of more innovative measures that can really, really make fundamental changes and savings to properties, to consumers. So this one is a very unsurprising one, but it just really reiterates what we talk about when we talk about insulation being so critical, even the harder to insulate homes. So this is a project in Cheshire where we worked on an insulation project. So I'm just checking my time. Good, I've still got time. It was a stage retrofit programme, and it was adding insulation to concrete housing, and it was external wall insulation. So we tried different combinations. Unsurprisingly, the external wall insulation combined with loft insulation and other air tightness measures was the most effective. So the combination of all of the above, but all of the insulation measures made a tangible difference to savings in the home. The average cost saving was around 31%, so it was around £200 per annum for customers. And this again just demonstrates kind of a no regrets path around insulation. Another project around insulation that we worked on was particularly with park homes, and that was where we genuinely had residents in tears because of the difference it had made to them. So just moving on to some principles and recommendations. So what do we believe is best practice to support a fair and equitable transition? Starting off, I know I've probably harped on about this too much already, but I don't think it can be said too many times. We must reduce the space heating requirements before installing new heating systems, in part to make sure that the heating system has been sized correctly, but also ultimately if a customer can't put or client can't put their heating on, if it's well insulated, then their home will at least still be warmer and it won't be ice cold. So it's absolutely a no regret option from our point of view. We need to do retrofit with and not to consumers. All too often we've seen retrofit kind of put upon consumers, and that's where that engagement and negative kind of lack of consumer acceptance can come in. If we don't communicate effectively, we'll never resolve some of the challenges around confidence and acceptance in this newer technology landscape. Community engagement is key. We risk vulnerable and low-income customers suffering real significant detriment, as I touched on at the beginning, if they're not properly engaged. Knowledge and skills need to be developed. We will talk about this more in session 2, but ultimately we have insufficient skills in the sector to properly and effectively support more vulnerable consumers currently, in our opinion. Technologies need to be inclusive by design, and I would encourage you to take a look at the Fair by Design report on this. I've got a link at the end of this presentation. I've already spoken about the scale of vulnerability, but inclusivity must not be an afterthought. It needs to be built in from the outset. We are letting people down if we fail to do that. We need to understand the house and the person, so that sizing, consumption, and accessibility is appropriate. We must embed behaviour change, and this cannot be underestimated. When we're changing to potential low carbon options from a gas central heating system, it requires fundamental changes in behaviours and how the system is being used. If we don't support people with that behaviour change transition, we risk people for cost paying more. And what do we mean by value for money? Well, I just wanted to touch on this point just towards the end here, because technology choice must be fully researched before committing to it. Value for money must not be just about price, it must be about quality as well. So running costs to the consumer, but also ongoing maintenance requires. Just being cheap to fit and easy to fit is not value for money in our opinion. Just skip there a moment. Independent household advice. We need a clear pathway that isn't just online to independent information and advice. Clear and accessible materials, which I talked about earlier, and person-centred skills needed across the sector. We want to also see a commitment to share learning, improve and disprove concepts. We know not every option is going to work in every home, but we need to continue this discussion about what works and critically what doesn't, so mistakes aren't made at scale, nor to the detriment of people who can least afford it. Quality standards must be monitored and enforced against, and we also want to see clear consumer protections and warranties. So there's a clear pathway for redress, and there's insurances and warranty protections in place so that those customers who might engage with it, who we hope to engage with low carbon transition, particularly vulnerable and low income consumers, don't suffer a negative impact if things were to go wrong, which hopefully they won't, but recognising that's potential. So I'm just going to wrap up now. So just in terms of conclusions, we see this as we recognise everything will be a balance, of course. There's not always going to be an outright right, particularly recognising the transience of households, so people may move out. So we do need to recognise that as another challenge, I guess. But there will be some very clear wrongs and pitfalls, and completely avoidable pitfalls, and that's where it's important to embed best practice from the outset. So I guess a strapline: people and homes, not only buildings and carbon. We want to see it hardwired into the transition, that we talk about the lives and homes of real people, millions in very vulnerable circumstances, more so now than ever, and we can't view decision making just through carbon reduction alone. We know that one size is not going to fit all. We can't make sweeping assumptions about one technology over another. The reality is the best solutions are likely to require a matrix of different technologies underpinned by hopefully the best practice pillars that we've set out today as well. And we know that collaboration is key. This is a shared challenge and we all bring a different perspective to it. So it's important that we continue to collaborate, learn and share and embed best practice. Just to conclude, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things in terms of sort of watch this space, and also direct you to a few other reports that I think would be useful for people to take a look at if you're interested in some of the things that we've talked about today. First and foremost, we are party to the Bayes Electrification of Heat programme, which is the demonstration project looking at the large-scale rollout of heat pumps. We're really delighted to be working with E.ON and Newcastle City Council on that programme, and it'll be really interesting insight to understand the role and scope for heat pumps across the UK, and particularly the impacts for fuel-poor customers. We also have a more innovative programme which is working with Voxergy, funded by the EST Redress programme. That's been in terms of the actual trial, that's been slightly pushed back due to COVID, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll have a lot of insights over the coming year ahead. The system uses a high temperature heat pump with a heat battery and electric battery, and they're fitted to homes on time of use tariffs, with the heat pump running primarily during off-peak periods. So obviously what we're hoping is that will bring the costs of the electricity right down. So using the time of use tariff and free energy from the PV, we're hoping that it will bring the price right down. There's evidence to suggest that it could potentially give rise to costs which are comparable with gas costs, which could be quite an exciting innovation. We also encourage you to take an active interest in the work being led by Citizens Advice around Net Zero Homes Guarantee, and there's a link to their working document on their website there. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the Fair by Design and Money Advice Trust, setting out how best to build inclusivity in from the outset. So that is me concluded. There's my details, and also my colleague Michael Hamer, as I mentioned, heads up the innovation and technical evaluation team there, and we welcome all questions after we hand over to Chris. So now I'm going to put my other hat on, and I'm going to hand over to Chris from CERO as the next speaker of today's session. Thank you all for your time, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Danny.
Let me just stop sharing, hopefully.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris.
No problem. And I should be sharing now, not scaring. Hello, everyone. My name's Chris. I'm the Customer Experience Manager at CERO. Let me just put my time on as well, because there's lots to talk about, and two, also I get really excited when I talk about this and talk really, really quickly. It could be done in a minute. But,
Chris, would you mind, I'm not sure if it's just me or others, but would you mind getting a little closer to the microphone, because it's slightly quiet on my end, but I'm not sure if that's everybody. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant, no problem, no problem. Okay, so my name's Chris. I'm the Customer Experience Manager at CERO. CERO are a home comfort company, a home energy services company providing comfort as a service in South Wales. And we're a relatively new company. We won Startup of the Year in Cardiff last year. We were formed when an engineer called James and an architect called Andy met over a beer and decided to try and change the world. And what I'm going to talk about over the next 10 minutes is some of the exciting things that go on in Wales that we're heavily involved in, and also give some insight of how we think the consumer, the customer, the resident forms a key part of helping decarbonisation of the world. So, sorry, 1 second, my slides aren't advancing. That's better. Currently in South Wales, we are at CERO are engaged in what is called the Optimised Retrofit project, which is a collaboration of 68 partners, including 26 social housing organisations, some technology firms and financial services institutions, working together to help fight climate change, but also fuel poverty at the very same time. It is funded by £13 million from the Welsh Government as part of the Innovative Housing Programme, and over the first year, it will see over 1,700 homes have energy efficiency improvements to lower their energy cost and lower their carbon footprint. But it's much more than that. As part of the design and development of those, we will be refining and creating digital tools to help the decarbonisation of homes all across Wales. Tools such as the whole home survey, which recognises a point that you made yourself, Danny, that each home will have a different solution for being its lowest energy carbon footprint and its lowest energy use. And this tool, put in the hands of 100 surveyors trained to use it so far, helps them to easily assess that specific home with real world observation of the home's performance, and how the resident, the owner or renter of that home, lives in their home, and produce a series of incremental steps that over weeks, months and years can move that home towards the lowest possible carbon footprint that it can have. It's really exciting to see that these homes will be pathfinder homes for delivering that change to their homes. And straight away, those 1,700 homes will feel the benefit from more energy efficiency. But it's also more than that. The project is committed as part of the way the Welsh Government works to help support the foundational economy, not just through procurement and supporting the SMEs to thrive and flourish in driving this, but identifying the skills gaps that were talked about earlier that exist in our economy, and providing training, support and guidance to retrain professionals where they might need to, but also work with young people through further education institutions to help and support them and support their learning and development to a greener, cleaner career over the future. Because what we have seen so far, and everyone else has already talked about it so far, is that there is a skills gap that will need to be achieved if we're going to fight global warming and do all of those things. There's 100 surveyors currently out there in the field completing these surveys, getting this unique pathway to zero, that list for that home on how it can improve, but also refining the tool each time, getting it better and better to make it quicker and easier for us to do this, which is really exciting. But it's more than that. This is about creating a pragmatic solution to decarbonising homes in Wales, based on real world observations, real world engagement with residents, and understanding of how they can do things, how they can move things forward. And that's what makes it really, really exciting. That was a whistle-stop tour, but I realise I've used 5 minutes already. Look, if this project if me describing that project hasn't got you excited, then that's me underselling it. So I would really encourage you, visit the website, optimisedretrofit.wales. Follow us on Twitter, @OptimizedR. You could do that now. You're sat at a computer, you could follow us. There's loads of information on there. I'll pause while you do that, not least because I've got a bet with one of my colleagues to try and drive up our Twitter followers. No, I'm joking. It's a really, really exciting project. Please do go look at them more, because it's coming around and showing in Wales how we want to do things different and engage the entire community, the economy, to help decarbonise homes and save energy. Now, you could ask, and you would be right to ask, why is the customer experience manager talking about those things? Because at Cero, we recognise that the installation of the technology and all of those things, and the development and all of those things are great, but they have to be worked with the customer to make them work and get the maximised benefit. That's why Cero Life, our customer service facing company, is in it for the long haul. We work with the customer following retrofit or in a new build plan over weeks, months and years to support them to understand the best uses of their technology, to help them guide them and support them to lower their energy bills and lower their their carbon footprint. And in some instances, to increase their level of comfort as well, so that we can fight against those situations where only one room can be heated and all of those things. So we know happens. And we have the opportunity now, alongside carbon reduction, to reduce energy poverty. We recognise that one size won't fit all. There will be different technology combinations for people. We know that the desire is there for people to do this, but they need the support to do it. Where we've seen, district heating schemes and other things fall and struggle in the past is where it's installed, people disappear, and the customer is left unable to use the technology at the end, which is why we're there as their energy provider to work with them to do it over time. We have a purpose to save customers money, save them time, and help save the planet. We've talked about all those things that will help them save them money, and me and my team will work with the customer to build that schedule to be as close to set and forget as they want, as we can get it, to help save them time, making it easier for people to engage with. There is an app for people who want to engage with us digitally. There's physical controls if people don't want to do that. We have a contact centre based in Cardiff as well, where people want to just phone up and talk us through, and we can help them around doing it. It works quite simply, and you've heard some talk so far about...
Chris, sorry to interrupt you again. I've just noticed on the chat, I think for some people the microphone is still going a little bit in and out, and I don't know if
I'm really sorry. I will...
Not to worry.
Sorry. Okay, so we've talked about dynamic pricing and dynamic tariff pricing. Usually your average consumer is unaware of it because even with smart meters, we don't have smart tariffs that reflect the change of wholesale prices in the energy market through the course of the day. This shows typically how it goes. And what we want to do to help lower people's carbon and their cost of energy is avoid as much energy of use in that peak time as we possibly can in the early evening, when people are coming home from work and school and preparing an evening meal. Now, you can't just tell people to change their lives. That's not practical. People are still going to need it. That's where we use battery storage and smart energy optimization from the Cero B to help shift as much of that as we possibly can by charging the battery overnight or with solar panels so that they can use that energy in the peak time, making smart decisions about when to turn on heating and hot water with improved insulation to make sure we avoid those peak times. That means that we can give for people on lower incomes who are struggling with fuel poverty individually tailored money saving tips based on their usage as we've learned about how their home responds to their energy usage over time. We've seen, and I've used it as the example in this slide, a lot of people thought, reduce your temperature on your thermostat by 1 degree and save a lot of money. That's great, that's true. But if your home's chronically underheated and you're self-disconnecting all the time, it's not practically going to make a significant difference. Where we are different, because we've been involved in the design and installation of the technology, we can work with the customer, contact them proactively and say, actually, we've noticed this in your energy usage. If we can understand that better, maybe shift that, change that, look at different times, we can help you save money and keep your home warmer and more comfortable for you. And in fact, if the customer just says, yeah, just do that for me, we can just, in one word, get that all sorted for them, move it on and make those things happen. These are just demonstrations of our service, and I'm not here to come and try and sell you Cero Life, but this is the energy information that we get from and how people can access our services. That's probably, wow, I actually went over a whistle-stop tour, but yeah, the key point that I'd like you to understand from what we're doing is, one, go and have a look at Optimised Retrofit, understand what that's looking like. It's a really exciting project and shows you how I believe Wales is leading the way in tackling some of these points. And I would agree with what the other panelists have said already. Engaging the customer is the key part of this solution. That's why we are in it for the long haul, to work with the customer over weeks, months and years to help them organise their energy use, optimise it and get the maximum benefit from it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. Apologies, I had to interrupt. I know it's the worst thing when you're trying to speak, so I do apologise for that. But I think hopefully the sound sorts itself out towards the end. I'm now going to hand over to Will from Clarion Housing Group, and then we've got huge numbers of questions to try and get through at the end as well, so we will do our best to look at some of those questions. Hand over to you, Will. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will Ray. I am Head of Sustainability for Clarion. Hopefully you've seen the slides here. And I thought I would, in the outline of my presentation, I realised it's quite ambitious what I set out to do in 10 minutes. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see, and perhaps a little bit how Clarion sees the way forward in terms of unlocking the zero carbon transition in social housing specifically, and how that relates to the challenges around fuel poverty as well. Clarion Housing Group, for those that don't know, is the largest social landlord in the country still, with a heritage which dates back over 100 years. Our purpose, if you like, is to provide good quality and affordable homes for people priced out of the market. We have around 1,000 homes across more than 170 local authorities. We're also a developer as well as a landlord, and we're building thousands of homes, affordable homes every year, and we're scaling that up to around 4,000 a year. As well as being a social landlord and developer, we also invest in our residents and their communities through our charitable foundation, Clarion Futures. This is an important part of supporting our social purpose. I guess the first thing for us on this journey was the fact that we recognise the need to change. This is a no small thing. That we've been progressing, I guess, in terms of improving our stock, making it more energy efficient, improving the quality of what we do and what we provide. And that's been a continuous process over the last 15 years or more. And we've previously, when we were Affinity Sutton Circle Housing, done previous pilots, such as people may have heard of the Future Fit program, or some of the passive house work that we did as Circle Housing. But now as Clarion, I think we've recognised that there's a need to connect this to the end goal, which is that transition to zero carbon, and that there are significant changes required in our approach. What are the goals for social housing providers and for the industry as a whole? Well, I think there are really 5 goals that we've got to keep in mind. And this is something that I pick up on the Environmental Audit Committee report, which came out on Monday. And it was quite, it pulled no punches in setting out what the challenges were for industry and for the government in making the transition. The 5 are that providing zero carbon ready solutions for homes. Sounds like it's fairly simple, but actually, what we need to do if we're going to achieve the scale is to have incremental or all-in-one retrofit solutions that are as easy as buying a new kitchen. And that's not available today, I would say, necessarily, or not to a great deal of surety. We need a greater scale of retrofit. We do now have a clear timeline. We've got 30 years to transition pretty much nearly all homes from a fossil fuel-based economy to a zero carbon economy. They've had incremental improvements, but we do have this major transition to go in terms of efficiency and in terms of zero carbon heating. That requires a much greater scale than we've ever imagined before. In terms of, as we go on this journey, I think it's important that we look to provide something better, something enhanced in terms of comfort and efficiency. And that supports what Danny was saying in terms of aiming to bring residents with us on this journey. And, that's shown through the work maybe in the electric car field of companies like Tesla, that if you aim for better, consumers will come with you. 4th, I think we need to look at quality. There's been a lot of press in the past about poor quality retrofits in various guises and in various technology forms. And, we as a social housing provider have been subject to this. And I think it's really important that we aim to eliminate poor outcomes and unforeseen consequences as we go along on this journey. And that's a responsibility that the supply chain really needs to bring forward to us as clients. We shouldn't have to be asking for things that don't break or things that don't deliver on their promises. Finally, I think we need to think about usability. And we've already mentioned ensuring that the needs of the vulnerable are not forgotten or not left behind in this. And particularly in the discussion where we're adding potentially significant amounts of technology into the homes, and new technology that's thoroughly different from what's been in the homes of people over the last 30 years or more. We need to ensure that this technology is usable and usable across all customer groups and segments. So underlying those goals, there are some really distinct needs. And again, I'd point to the Environmental Audit Committee report on Monday as really setting out these needs quite starkly. And this is something that I think, Clarion is cognizant that we need to be a part of the solution, but also government needs to present pathways for all of these issues within their heat and buildings strategy that is coming forward. So the first moment about what the balance is between energy efficiency and zero carbon heating solutions. And that makes a very, very significant difference in terms of the outcome, in terms of investment for us as a social housing provider. What solutions are we investing in? How much do we invest in a fabric first energy efficiency solution that upgrades the efficiency? How much do we invest in zero carbon heating solutions? And what does this mean for properties, whether that be in the main street in London or in a village? The second, aligned with that idea of clear targets, is directed innovation and collaboration. At the moment, I perceive a significant gap between the challenges that we face as a housing association and our residents, and the solutions that are offered by the supply chain. Articulate a directed program towards this. I think the offshore wind model, the offshore wind growth shows how significant the potential for this model of collaboration and improvement, where they've achieved their cost reduction targets and achieve a mass rollout of offshore wind on a scale, again, not imagined 20 years ago. Alongside that is this idea of sharing, learning, and developing skills. We can't do this without a really step change in the way that we learn as a construction and housing sector. The cycles of learning, the cycles of innovation tend to be very slow. Even rapid projects take 1 to 2 years to complete and get results from. So the ability of bringing this into the mainstream and leveraging that work and spreading the learning really quickly is a key challenge to making sure that we accelerate the transition and achieve scale. Finally, alongside that is the support to plan for scale. So at the moment, realistically, we're doing a handful of retrofits in the market, and particularly zero carbon retrofits. How do we transition this? How do we plan to transition this from effectively bespoke small products to mass production? There are a number of different trials being worked on in this area, but I think, again, this is something that needs to be articulated in terms of a pathway. And we see during COVID-19 that if you do plan to scale things like in the vaccination rollout, the success will come. So I think that planning is critical. Again, alongside that, there is a big challenge around investment. As I said, it's uncertain as to the total scale of that investment at the moment and how large it is. But there is a gap between what we are able to afford as a landlord and still go ahead to be providing new affordable homes. Doing the construction of new homes that the government and the UK need as a whole. And between what our capability is to invest in retrofit. So what we need to look at is a new stable framework for investment that allows the benefits of that retrofit not just to sit with the customer and resident, but to be shared with ourselves as a housing provider and with the wider community that get the benefit of achieving the zero carbon goal. Finally, I think we can't move aside from this continuing recognition that fuel poverty is still a symptom of poverty, and retrofitting all the houses to whatever level possible isn't going to just address this. We still need an integrated approach to addressing fuel poverty. So I'd just like to finish on what we're doing and a few things. I'm pleased to announce we were announced as one of the successful bidders in the social housing. Yesterday, we're doing 160 homes with our partners, Fenland and Tonbridge and Malling councils. We're really excited to get going on that program, and we've already started on that, even though we haven't been announced. It's a very, very rapid program, and we'll be finished by the end of the year. And I'm excited about the ability to start this pilot work at scale and to really learn from that. We are doing some work on deep diving on targets. We're also doing work on rolling out retrofit coordinator training and developing the skills of our own employees and our partner contractors. We are working on those innovative investment models, particularly building on our work on the successful sustainability bond issues that we've done previously, and we're participating in the Green Finance Institute Coalition on Energy Efficient Buildings to pilot this work. We are working on planning to scale, and we have some work which I can't talk about at the moment, but hopefully soon, on looking at building retrofit passports, which is somewhat aligned to the work of Zero that was mentioned before. We also are continuing with our work on integrated fuel poverty support. We already provide that through our Clarion Futures money guidance work. And we're very proud of the work that we've been able to do, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, in providing vouchers for people in critical need. I'd also sort of finish off with the idea that actually we need to not forget that it's not just the homes that we need to transition as a social landlord, but we need to provide for zero carbon ready mobility. That's the cars or the transport that people take, for biodiversity, and the need to really have a step change in our improvement on that. And lots of things to think about there, but I'll stop there and let you guys go on.
Fantastic, thank you, Will. There was a couple of moments where you dipped out, but I think we actually managed to catch everything there, so that was great. I really appreciate that kind of overview, and congratulations on the Social Housing Decarb Fund. So we're just going to go into questions now. Appreciate that we've only got limited time for Q&A, and you have not failed to deliver on the questions. We've tried to answer some in the Q&A as we've gone along, but what we will try and do is respond to some of these afterwards as well and circulate them. But for the panel, would it be okay, Will, if you stop sharing your screen and I invite the panel back on screen, if that's okay, and then we will just ask maybe 3 or 4 questions. I'll try and be optimistic and get through 4 questions with you all. Will, are you happy to stop sharing? I'm not sure if that's just my screen. Perfect, thank you. And Will, if you wanted to come back on screen, that would also be great. Hey. So just to one of the big questions that's been asked by quite a number of people actually on the Q&A, and also we had a pre-question come in as well, was around levies and pricing. So a nice easy one to kick us off: regressive pricing on gas and electricity. So Matt, would you mind if I kicked off with you to address that one?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So levies are regressive, or they are a regressive way around to recover those costs, because generally everyone pays a similar amount, especially if there's a fixed cost on the bill. Everyone pays the same amount, and lower income people pay the same amount as higher income people. So that's clearly a bad thing. I think there's different levels as to what we might want to see done to address that issue. The Holy Grail is, as was pointed out in one of the questions, the moving stuff to general taxation. I think we've been calling for that for a long time for a lot of things. I think that's difficult for BEIS to do, because they would have to go to Treasury every year to say, can you fund next year's feed-in tariff, or something to that extent. So politically, that's a difficult thing to do, and would probably put a lot of this stuff in jeopardy. So we understand why that might not happen. So then you've got to think, okay, if stuff has to be on levies, what can you do to make it more progressive? First thing to do is to ring fence the beneficiaries. So if stuff's having to be paid for on the bill, the benefits of that stuff should go to poorer customers. So things that are a good example of this is eco and a warm home discount. They're funded through bills, but actually poorer customers who need support get the benefit from that. So that those are sort of good things. And the other thing is not to recover costs in a flat way. If you do recover it in a flat way, so that every meter essentially pays the same amount, that is very regressive. It's less regressive if you do it on energy use. So there are different levels to it. But then there's one other thing that you could do to sort of eliminate the detriments for a certain set of customers. So if you were to move levies from electricity to gas, that would clearly have a really poor effect on many fuel poor households. And as I said in my presentation, would lead to higher costs for gas users and fuel poor households being more likely to ration their energy. But you could just completely offset that, and the government could choose to provide a rebate to those households to cover those costs. We did that almost 10 years ago. David Cameron's government did that in the general electricity rebate, the government electricity rebate, to cover the costs of, I think he referred to it as the green crap. You could do that the same now, but more targeted in order to reduce the exposure to fuel poor households of those costs. So lots of opportunities to mitigate those impacts. But as I said in my presentation, we need to understand the impacts and mitigate them.
Thank you, Matt. That's a very comprehensive answer. I really appreciate it. Chris or Will, did you want to comment on that? I do have other questions for you, though, if you would rather just take the hospital pass.
I mean, I think the key thing for us is about that investment model. So, you know, establishing something which provides the sharing of the benefit in the appropriate way, so that we can, you know, and in a way that protects fuel poor customers. So, you know, I think there is potential for integration of everything as well, and a lot of simplification, because at the moment there's so many different initiatives, whether it be affordable warmth or eco or feed-in tariffs or, you know, whatever the model, bringing that together would be great, and making that you know, shareable in terms of being a long-term approach as well, not chopping and changing year to year.
Fantastic, thank you. One other question which has come up more than once within the Q&A is around struggling to actually find or engage low-income households who are interested in being part of some of these schemes. I think some of that will have fallen out of some of the challenges, some of the reasons why that engagement is difficult. But how would colleagues on the panel advise agencies to engage with those low-income consumers? Chris, would you mind if I started with you, given the Optimised Retrofit programme?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Danny. It's a real challenge, and particularly in these COVID worlds, you know, you can't do in the simple thing you used to do to engage with communities en masse. So we're trying to make the best of social media, to talk to people at drop-ins, take every opportunity around to engage with people, because you can't have those big meetings and invite people in to talk to them. I think it's important in reality, in the same with anything, that we know there's not going to be one size fits all way to engage with people. And I think you have to work every element of it. There will be some people that social media are right for. There are some people that newsletters will be right for. There'll be some people who will just need direct contact and then go in to talk about it. It's about a bit of doing everything, I think, particularly with the current challenges.
I'm going to add a couple of bits, but before I do, I won't take advantage of my role as chair. Did anybody else want to comment on that particular question? No, so the other area where we often find we can secure engagement is very much working with trusted local partners. Then making sure you engage through people who are already trusted by those community groups, particularly factoring in not necessarily even just only low income, but perhaps if there's other specific conditions or health conditions that might be a good route to establish a connection. I think messaging coming from trusted partners is really, really key. We also often build in very small scale but effective incentive models into some of our programs, and by small scale I do really mean sort of £20-30 shopping vouchers, nothing substantial. So overall the cost isn't huge, but it really can make a difference to people engaging, particularly if you have monitoring requirements attached to your projects.
Yeah, just on that, you're absolutely right, but I'd just say don't underestimate the impact that those small community figureheads can have. You know, the person who runs the local corner shop where people are going and making those payments and all of those things, they'll know the people who are in fuel poor, and they'll be a great place to engage with people and point them in your direction.
I think we've probably got time for one more. So this one was an interesting one. Do you think the Priority Services Register should be expanded to support customers through the energy transition? For example, should installers, energy aggregators also be required to hold PSRs? There might be many people in the audience that are also wanting to answer this as well, but I welcome comments from the panel. Go on, Matt.
I'm going to give a little bit of a cop-out answer and bring it up a level. So I think that as we move into this lower carbon future, and as I said previously, electricity and gas are really well regulated generally. There's quite a high level of consumer protection when you're buying electricity and gas from suppliers. As we're moving into this sort of different world, we're going to be much more reliant on different technologies, which might be linked to your tariff and might not be so well regulated by general consumer protection. So I think that actually, if you think about it in the round, we need to think about how these different technologies are going to be regulated, specifically if they are going to be so integral to our energy use and also entwined with our energy tariffs in a sort of heat as a service model. That might include something like PSR. I'm not going to commit to whether I think that every sort of manufacturer or whatever or seller needs to have a PSR themselves, but I do think there needs to be a broader look at how we regulate all these different parts of supplying energy, given that it's all going to become much more intertwined in the next 10 or 20 years.
So we are coming to the end of the session, I'm afraid, because we do need to move into session 2 without squeezing time too much. There are, as we expected, a huge number more questions than we've been able to get through. If you've not been able to ask your question in Q&A, can I encourage you to drop it into the Q&A, because what we'll do is we'll extract a list of those questions and try to get to answer them and circulate to all delegates that attended today. Just in terms of what's going to happen now, you're going to have a 10-minute, we're all going to have a 10-minute comfort break. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers for the first part, and for all of you that have attended, for all of your questions. We will try, as I say, to answer as many as possible. We also would like any thoughts around key themes or deep dive areas where you might like us to do an event in the future around anything that we've touched on today, and where we might be able to facilitate future events to kind of discuss those in more depth, because I appreciate time has been constrained. We're going to take a short comfort break, 10 minutes. There will be another neat time up, but I'm afraid it's not going to be anywhere near as exciting as it sounds, because you will just be faced with my face again when you rejoin. We will go for 10 minutes, so we'll start back at 11:25 if that's okay, and then we'll go into session 2, and I'll do a quick summary of what we're going to cover in session 2 when you rejoin. So again, once again, really appreciate all of your input from the speakers, and also thank you all for your contributions in the chat and the Q&A. Much appreciated. We will see you in 10 minutes. back, everybody, and thank you for rejoining us. So this second session is talking about skills and standards. Some of the themes touched on during the early session we'll also be going into now, but we want to do a deeper dive into the skills gap and particular standards as well. We appreciate and recognise the low carbon transition will require a much deeper understanding of what it takes to build a low carbon society, including kind of scaled up workforce across multiple kind of layers of the interaction with the consumer, right through to planning and such like. Sustainable development, different technologies, understanding fuel poverty and also vulnerability. We also know that consumer protection and standards absolutely must keep pace with the decarbonisation and the introduction of varying technologies, and people are not left without redress if things go wrong. Just before I start to introduce my colleagues on the panel, I wanted to just reference a report that was published back in December by the MCS Foundation around energising advice. And that quite clearly outlined and established that current provision of energy advice and information on retrofitting homes is inadequate, and urged the government to take a new approach to ensure that homeowners can benefit from these technologies and from the low carbon transition approaches. During this session, we hope to talk to some of the challenges, but also in keeping with the theme of the morning, we also want to touch on some of the solutions. So I'm delighted to be joined by another panel of excellent speakers, which includes my colleague Chris Ellis, who's NEA's Training and Assessment Manager. He heads up our training and education team, and all of our quality assurance processes, and a full suite of accredited qualifications and training products. We've also got Kelly Greer, Research Director from the Association for Decentralised Energy. Kelly's been Head of Research at ADE since January 2017. She's got over 16 years experience working in carbon reduction, fuel poverty alleviation, as well as sustainability. And of course, she also worked at NEA, which I think is important to mention. We also have David Pierpoint, Chief Executive from the Retrofit Academy. David founded the Retrofit Academy in 2016 and has led the development of the Retrofit Coordinator qualification and establishment of a Centre of Excellence. And he's considered one of the UK's leading experts on retrofit education, and is a regular speaker at conferences. So I know he's got a full workload this week of conferences. So thank you all for joining us. I wanted to hand over now to Chris to kick us off, and I will stop my video. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Danny, and good morning, everybody. I'm hoping that this is technology that is now working fine. It seems to be my end. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I wanted to touch upon the what NEA is doing in response to the skills gap, the skills agenda around the issues that we've all just been talking around in terms of the decarbonisation agenda. I've been working at NEA for numerous years now, and it has been interesting to see the kind of the transition heading more towards the decarbonisation agenda, and how we as a fuel poverty charity can get involved, and what sort of direction of travel we want to be aiming towards in terms of keeping the fuel poor agenda, keeping the household or the person at the centre of all the decision making, as well as also the skills and the advice side of things as well. So hopefully in the next 10 minutes, it will be, to coin a phrase that's often used now, is a whistle-stop tour of what we are actually looking to achieve. So just a little bit about NEA, because I appreciate there's quite a number of people probably on this webinar that may well have just been new to NEA. Given the context of where we have been and where we're coming from, we've been delivering training and assessment for over 35 years. On average, we train around about 5,000 learners every year, and they range from a whole range of organisations, from frontline workers to volunteers to utility companies through to government departments. We have a wide range of courses that are available. All of our learning, and the beauty about being part of NEA is it's all evidence-based learning. We have a fantastic array of departments that sit within NEA and allow us to build up a really high quality evidence-based learning product based on technical evaluation team, research team evidence, and allows us to kind of build up and create products that really are fit for purpose for the frontline worker kind of market, but anyone who's looking to engage with fuel poverty. Obviously, due to COVID, we've obviously been supporting digital learning. as well as creating educational resources. So any kind of further information that you want to know or find out about NEA's training, by all means visit the website. You will get copies of these slides, so you can use the links that's on there. So when we talk about the skills, knowledge that is needed in the context of low carbon technologies in vulnerable households, as I have alluded to before, the kind of the experiences and the benefits of working with NEA and our partners, operating through large projects such as the Technical Innovation Fund, which allowed us to understand the true impact of installing low carbon technologies, in particular with lower income and vulnerable households in mind. So with that in mind, obviously there's a fairly obvious statement that we would recommend all stakeholders undertake some form of training in this area. And the reason why I say that is that it's not just for a frontline worker to be educated slightly on low carbon technologies and the impacts. It's for the kind of the process from almost birth right the way through to like a circular kind of format of kind of people who are actually designing products, procuring, should be aware of the impacts on households, and then hopefully have a better understanding of which technology is the most appropriate. We need to ensure, as a key NEA focus, is that we are not leaving vulnerable householders behind in this particular movement, which is a fairly easy thing to do. So we at NEA and hopefully our partners and like-minded people on this webinar will not let that happen. Low carbon technologies can be successful, and as a result of our projects that we've been involved in and reading other people's projects, research documents, they can be successful when installed as part of a comprehensive offer to the householder. Making people-centric decisions is key. So as a result of all our kind of learnings, of all the kind of different projects and research that we've been involved in, we kind of identified this core kind of skills and objectives we would like people to understand, or to kind of at least get involved in some of these. And I'm going to do the kind of boring thing about just reading this out, so I do apologize, but I think it is really important. We should be looking to ask people to identify and understand the links and issues associated with decarbonisation and net zero technologies and their impacts on householders. We should be looking to identify householders and identify community engagement as a priority, and some of the previous speakers have alluded to that, and the successful projects have clearly shown that when you engage properly with a householder and bring them along for the journey right from the start, you get a really fantastic outcome. When you don't, that's when problems tend to happen. We would also look to consider the potential impact of a selection of low carbon technologies on household bills and comfort as well. So it's about kind of getting the right technology and making sure that actually sometimes these technologies don't eventually turn out to actually increase household bills and decrease comfort. And again, sometimes that's through kind of being able to select the appropriate kind of controls, understand how these things are actually working. So there's a bit of a common theme about bringing advice and skills back into these kind of key decision making when you're looking at setting up kind of householder engagement projects. We would also look to explain how to select suitable technologies for different property types as well. It's really key that in the decision making process that the suitable technologies are chosen, and householder needs and property types are intertwined within that decision making process. As opposed to one size fits all kind of situation, which doesn't always work. And we'll look to identify common installation and operational issues as well. I think that's really important. That's there are kind of a lot of issues that are around installation, and a lot of lessons that need to be learned, and also good practice that needs to be highlighted as well. This is not about a negative experience. This is about kind of a balance of identifying what's good, what's bad, what's been great, what's worked and what hasn't. And we would be looking to kind of effectively engage with residents and partners to make sure that we have, certainly in my point of view, a training product or an offering to the sector that identifies a lot of these kind of issues. We would look to explain how to effectively engage and assist residents with understanding the technology. So as I've alluded to as well, that's a real kind of big weighty piece around behaviour change. It's been alluded to before. This is a large kind of scale shift in our energy markets, kind of going from gas traditionally or in the main to a more renewable type of technology. And that's going to take a significant amount of effort from everybody to get to the point of being able to understand how to bring the householder along for the journey, and for them to understand the impacts of controls and the actual technologies itself. So they're the kind of the core areas that we looked at and thought, well, these are the sort of things that, as a result of these projects, we need to highlight, and we need to see how we can help as an organisation, sectors, partners, staff in actually, how do we actually go about creating something that will actually help people understand this better, and be able to disseminate information to both kind of partners and also householders in general. So we've actually, for the last year and a half, in partnership with my colleagues in the Innovation and Technical Evaluation team, we've set about creating a selection of flexible e-learning modules. And that comprises of a new course and qualification, which is soon to be released, which is called Decarbonising Homes, Technologies, Impacts and Solutions. So it's almost looking at neatly packaging up all the issues around what we've previously just been listening to from different kind of speakers, along with the kind of the evidence and the experiences that we have as an organisation. On the right-hand side, you'll see a list of the different kind of modules, which I won't overly go through in too much detail, but essentially it will discuss the benefits of different technologies, use case studies from NEA's innovation trials to illustrate examples of resident satisfaction. We look to highlight the advantages of each technology, but also the potential issues and considerations. So it's a balanced look at each individual technology that's pertinent to a particular area. Say, for example, heat pumps would be, air source heat pump, ground source heat pump, and so on. So that the 9 flexible e-learning modules are available as a full course, which eventually will end up, if you want to do the full 9 modules, you could actually eventually receive a level 4 NCFE awarding organisation NCFE qualification. And if you were only, say, interested in 2 or 3 or 4 or 1 module, then you could do that 1 module that's pertinent to your role or pertinent to your experience, and you'll still get a kind of do the assessment. You'll still get a credit that's based on that. So kind of the target audience is coming back to kind of when I first started, kind of almost on the second slide. The target audience is really everyone who's engaged in this particular sector or this particular theme. It's going from kind of people who are procuring these technologies right the way through to people, to installers, to even kind of engineers who have had conversations with, right the way through to kind of frontline workers. Everybody has a role to play in understanding these technologies, and even more importantly, understanding the implications for us on the household, and the implications on people's bills ultimately, and comfort. And that's kind of what we're looking to kind of mitigate any risk on this particular process having a huge impact on the fuel poor. Why should we all upskill? Essentially what Danny was alluding to before from MCS, again, just kind of slight repeat. Clear advice and support enables people to retrofit their homes, help reduce their energy bills, and choose the appropriate low carbon heating solution, which is critical for a zero carbon future. A worrying gap, though, in this support is creating barriers to people adopting low carbon technologies in their home. And that's a real kind of issue that we kind of resonated with us, and that's why we felt compelled to actually create, hopefully, a series of training products that will help everybody kind of understand these technologies in much better, and able to kind of disseminate information. Inappropriate advice, not just low carbon technologies, but across the board, advice provision has always been a sticking point. Inappropriate advice or absence of quality advice will result in the detriment of households, and therefore increase the risk of vulnerability and fuel poverty. This will therefore have a direct threat of the success of net zero and decarbonisation agendas going forward. That was a particular whistle-stop tour. And I think kind of what I wanted as an opportunity was to actually start hopefully a conversation with some like-minded stakeholders, people who would be interested in the particular course itself. And we have a link on our website that you can click on and express your interest in actually signing up for the course once it's released in about May time. But if you want to kind of have further support around the skills agenda, how potentially both organisations, your organisation, my organisation, we can all work together going forward, we'll be very much interested to hear that as well. So that was potentially a whistle-stop tour. I think this is a huge subject around skills and skills gaps, and I think we're just at the start. But I think this has been a useful starting point to kind of wet the whistle around kind of what we're about and what we can provide to help you and your staff and your colleagues to upskill. So essentially, thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions in the QA. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, much appreciated. I will hand over neatly to Kelly to talk about the supply chain skills, increasing capability and capacity. Apologies, too much talking from me already. Kelly, I'll hand over to you.
Right, I'm just double checking. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent, superb. Thank you very much, Danny, much appreciated, and great. I agree with everything that Chris had said there. Good morning, everyone. So my name's Kelly Greer. I head up the research team at the ADE, the Association for Decentralised Energy. Very quickly, if you don't know who we are, ACE Research is a very small team delivering projects for BEIS, Scottish Government, GLA, GMCA, on a range of decentralised energy projects. And I noted there was a reference to the STEP project in the chat. So hi, Ting Ting, from Citizens Advice in Reading. We're working with you on that. For those of you who don't know the ADE, we're the leading trade association with over 150 members across the sector. And that's covering energy efficiency, heat networks, demand-side response and combined heat and power. And that's across domestic, commercial and public sector. So we do cover quite a lot. NEA has asked me here today, after actually seeing me present on the BEIS Heat Network Skill Review project, which I'm going to talk about. And I will say I could talk about this project for hours. The report is quite a beast. So, bite-sized pieces today. As Chris said, whistle stop, wet the whistle. But if you do want to ask me further questions in the Q&A, or we can do a separate session in the future, I'm more than happy to engage on that point. I'm conscious that I want to look broader than heat networks. You know, this is a really big topic, and I think there's been a lot of activity, even just in the last year, and knowing what's going ahead. You know, as we move towards COP26, you know, there's a lot of things around, you know, skills, supply chain, zoned approaches, heat decarbonisation. So I just want to flag a few different things from different research projects that we're working on or have been involved in that you might find quite useful. And I think as part of all of this, you know, when we look at, you know, someone mentioned demand pull earlier, and you know, it's about creating that market and ultimately what is it that BEIS or industry can do to kind of push for demand pull, you know, getting all the policies or the incentives or in the programs all in place to ultimately support the supply chain. Because I think particularly from the energy efficiency sector that I've worked in for 17 odd years, I think many participants would agree we've seen some boom and bust over the years, and so it's about helping smooth those out. So very quickly, I want to talk about the BEIS Heat Network Skills Review. For those of you who don't know much about heat networks, they currently meet about 2% of UK heat demand, but the ambition is for that to increase to 18%. So that's a huge amount of growth in the sector, and there's billions of pounds of investments that's going into it. And ultimately, you need a strong supply chain for a market that's already growing but needs to get a lot bigger. And so we need to look at the capacity and the capability of the individuals who work in that supply chain. And as I said, government's working with industry to help us do that. Now, the objective of the skills review project was to kind of baseline the skills landscape in the sector. So it's all about placing the sector on the front foot. So it's, what's the practical recommendations that government and industry can take forward to grow capability, so skills, but also capacity and numbers, and ultimately all supporting this transition to net zero, and obviously the broader point about, fuel poverty alleviation. So this project was delivered by IFF Research, ACE, and Dr. Tanya Groth at SWECO. We looked at 70 odd documents in a major literature review covering heat networks, energy, engineering, but also other sectors that had really ramped up. So nuclear, wind, rail. So we looked at all the lessons learned. We had stakeholder interviews. We had 3 workshops. So a huge amount of stakeholders involved. And what I want to focus on now is the headline findings. So the research findings suggest that the industry is relatively well equipped from a capacity perspective, so numbers, to meet current demand. But there are a few exceptions to that, and one of which is, senior management who can ultimately direct a whole heat network project. There were some really interesting comments about a lack of diversity in the sector. When you look at heat networks, it's often considered a very male-dominated industry, very much true. And I think heat networks and the broader energy and engineering sector really need to look at how they attract their workforce, because I think with a lack of diversity, it reduces the talent pool, and then it reduces the attractiveness of the sector overall, and then it further reduces the labour pool. So you're really, it's incredibly complicated, and it's something that people are looking at. So for now, we're all right. We're getting there. If you look beyond and the kind of the route to net zero by 2050, the industry is unfortunately ill-equipped to respond to the surge in demand, both for skills, numbers. It's not great. So there's lots of work to do. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with heat networks, there are lots of different stages to how you actually develop a heat network. And, that's everything from coming up with a concept, figuring out the feasibility, looking at the design, then the actual installation, and then the operation and maintenance. And there's kind of a pathway. And there's obviously, as part of those stages, lots of different skills that come in at different times. And one of the things that we actually looked at as part of this project, and it shows the complexity of the overlapping of different skill sets that is part of heat networks. So, for example, public administration and urban planning, huge role there. There's obviously legal and finance in there, and these people are perhaps brilliant in terms of legal and finance stuff, but do they actually understand what a heat network is and how it operates and the commercials that sit behind it? So there's some training to be done with legal and finance people on that. Obviously, engineering plays a whole role, and there's obviously a lot of transferability of skills between different sectors in engineering. There's also construction and surveying, so that kind of civil engineering piece. Then you get to the actual installation. As you can see, my crazy Venn diagram is getting bigger and bigger. Then you've got energy supplies. So looking at the kind of commercial sector skills when it comes to operation, it's sales, customer support, etc. IT, huge one. And then overlaying that whole thing is project management. And so, it's an incredibly complex set of skills that are required both now and in the future. And it's just to say that BEIS are coming up with various different programs off the back of this project that will be starting to look at solving some of those issues. I want to very quickly move on to something called LHES. If you haven't heard of LHES, it stands for Local Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategies. They are pilots up in Scotland, so it's delivered through the Scottish Government. All local authorities are kind of undertaking a trial zoned approach in each individual area. And these are sometimes across the whole borough, sometimes they are certain segments, but they cover all different sectors. So domestic housing, commercial buildings, public sector buildings, as well as the different tenures within there. So, owner occupier versus rented, for example. It's been going since 2017, and it's looking at a range of, energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation kind of opportunities in areas. And my team are currently evaluating phase 3. But what you'll see across all the evaluation reports, which are all on the Scottish Government website, is that skills are a major issue across all three phases. They're a big barrier, and ultimately that needs to be resolved. We're hoping that ultimately Scottish Government decide that they're going to make LHEs a statutory duty, and with that we get a bit more resources, because what you see now is you've got this small little pilot and this job is placed on one individual, and that individual, looking at this list that's on here, needs to have all of these skills. And it is quite mad that someone, needs to be involved in a local authority and understand how authorities work. They need to understand about energy. They need to understand about buildings, planning, building control, how to influence policy and strategy in the council and actually get cross-sector support from within that council. They need to be a great project manager, taking strategy to implementation. They need to do a lot of stakeholder engagement, whether that's with the general public, whether or not that's with, commercial businesses. And this is quite a wish list. And it's amazing to find that some of these individuals do exist. They're few and far between. If only we could clone them, right? But yeah, as I said, hopefully with LHEs becoming a statutory duty, hopefully in the near future, we'll actually start to see how the resourcing works out within local government. The final thing that I want to touch upon is a big piece of research that I fed into last year. It was meant to be published in May 2020, and it's literally been published last week. So it's been a bit delayed. I will admit I have only read the executive summary. I'm sure like many of you who are working from home, you're missing your printers because I need to write and scribble all over everything. But I think just some of the headlines that comes from this research from the Construction Industry and Training Board is really key. And the thing that is brilliant about this is that the skills modelling and the scenarios are all linked to the Committee on Climate Change carbon budgets. And what this effectively says is that the construction industry needs to sort out its recruitment challenge. I mentioned it before from a broader heat network, energy and an environmental point of view, but this is specifically around the construction sector, which obviously includes retrofit. Now, the modelling suggests that they need an additional 350,000 full-time people, workers, needed by 2028, which when you think it's 2021 now, we've got quite the job ahead of us. These are the people that are mainly involved in delivering improvements to existing homes, but there are new buildings as well as embodied carbon. And when you look at the figures, it's increasing the workforce by about 13%. And also when you look specifically at the retrofit skills gap measures, and there's lots of facts and figures in this report, is that, we're going to need 59,000 more plumbers and HVAC workers and 86,000 project managers, including those retrofit coordinators. And what I've got the link to the actual publication on the next slide, but look at this graph. I know it's really hard to see, the font is awful, but it actually shows you what surveyors are required over the different time periods linked to the carbon budgets. So do investigate that one if you're really interested in skills and supply chain. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening. There's some interesting reports that I've added on the slide there, including a Scottish Government report on heat networks that looks at kind of academically what universities are doing. Obviously, the CITB research hot off the press. And the other thing to note is ADE, in the run up to COP26, will be doing a We Are Hiring campaign linked to green jobs, and we're keen for industry to be involved. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Kelly. And a kindred spirit in terms of setting homework at the end of your slides, like I did as well. Much appreciated. I'm going to move on to David, and then we'll go on to Q&A. So David's going to talk about how we can make PAS 2035 work for all. So I'll hand over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny, and thanks for inviting me along today. We're not too far behind schedule, but I will try and stick to the 10 minutes so we get some time for Q&A. This presentation to work. There we go. I had a nightmare with that yesterday, so I'm glad. Now, I'm used to speaking at conferences where PAS 2035, the British standard, is sort of the main topic of conversation. And it's been quite interesting watching this morning that that's not really been the main focus of things. I'm not going into detail about the PAS today, but if you are interested in how it works and more detail about it, there's some references at the end of this presentation, which are a really good place to start. But my brief for this was to talk about how can we make the introduction of these new standards for retrofit work for everybody, and I've kept it very much at an overview level. Before I get into that, a little bit about the Retrofit Academy. We're a community interest company. We've been established for just over 5 years now. We're best known for developing and delivering the Retrofit Coordinator qualification, which both Will and the previous speaker were referenced. So we're currently training just over 1,000 retrofit coordinators. We've been doing that through this nationally recognised qualification now for 3 years. Quite an extensive qualification, takes 150 hours or so to complete it, for sort of 4 weeks full-time study, or one of the other ways of doing it. We're also a National Centre of Excellence for Retrofit, so we're also a membership organisation. We have a very, very singular purpose, which is supporting our membership of both individuals and organisations to put this PAS into practice, which is a very challenging thing to do, as I'm going to talk about. Tomorrow we have our Retrofit for Social Housing Summit, so I'm in Danny's seat tomorrow, being the chair for that. We also now have a level 2 qualification in understanding domestic retrofit, which is awarded by the NOCN. That's a 3-day course and exam. It's ideal for installers, both new and existing, or new to whole house retrofit, and maybe existing energy efficiency installers, but this new way of working is new to them. And we have 1,000 free or funded places, government funded places for that available. You can apply for that via our website. I know there's a lot of public sector people on the call. Unfortunately, that funding can't be used for you. It's only for the private sector. Deadline's coming up on that. And we do a load of work in the social housing sector, which I won't dwell on now, as we don't have time. So what I'm going to give to you over the next 6 or 7 minutes are my sort of 8 steps that I think can help make this PAS work for everybody. But before we do that, we have to look, why do we have PAS 2035 in the first place? And there's a lot of installers out there who'd love an answer to that question, I know, because they're in the middle of trying to adapt it. We start about 5.5, 6 years ago, when there were a series of government reports, that government-sponsored reports, which highlighted that there were some terrible things going wrong on retrofit projects. Typical defect rates were between 10 and 15% at a very, very significant nature. You know, we had major health and safety risks. We had huge issues, one of which the NEA are currently remediating in Fishick, in the Preston area, which is costing millions to put right and is really undermining consumer confidence. So the government sponsored Each Home Counts review, a root and branch review of the sector. It made somewhere in the region of 22 recommendations. I'm just going to focus on 2 of those. The first recommendation was the introduction of a quality mark for the sector, which is the trust mark. And underneath the trust mark sit the accreditation schemes that retrofit coordinators and assessors as individuals are members of, and the installer schemes, the SEGAs and SWEGAs and NRC-EICs of this world, they all sit under. And that's been a huge step forward from what was previously a very piecemeal, fragmented environment. The other key recommendation was that there was a need for a code of conduct for the industry, which would enable it to reform itself around some commonly agreed principles. And those principles, that was undertaken by British Standards, BSI, and the result of that was BSI PAS 2035, the retrofit specification and standard. Now, there are two parts of it, really. You'll hear people talk about PAS 2035, which is the standard. You'll also hear people talking about PAS 2030, which is the installer standard, but the easiest way to see that is that's just a chapter of the book, which is PAS 2035. You can't have one without the other. It's just that PAS 2030 existed previously. Now, the trust mark requires full compliance with PAS 2035. So any scheme, and there are many of them now operating under the trust mark, you must use PAS 2035. So we've got LADS programs, SHDF programs, and the ECO now transitioning to the trust mark and therefore to PAS 2035. Now on to these 8 steps. Now I'm going to keep these pretty brief, but these are the things that must happen if we're going to make this a success. The first is if we're going to climb a mountain, we better decide what mountain it is before we start climbing it, because there's Mount Everest there. You don't get anywhere in terms of climbing Mount Everest if you're actually on K2. The mountain we're trying to climb here is to create a zero carbon United Kingdom by 2050. And that's the mountain we need to be on. And you know what? I don't know about you, but I only fancy climbing that mountain once if I can help it. But I'll probably want to climb it as you do with Everest, with 3 or 4 staging posts along the way. So we'll get into that roadmap, but let's make sure we're on that right mountain, that we have buy-in around that purpose, which of course is the theme of today's event. When we climb the wrong mountain, this is what we get. And unfortunately, this is what we've been doing in this country for quite a long time. So you can see here some examples that our tutors at the Retrofit Academy have photographed along the years of very poor detailing, poor design, examples of poor insulation, inadequate ventilation, which are leading to these really horrible damp and mold and condensation issues. These are the classic unintended consequences of retrofit. If you don't believe the evidence that I'm presenting to you today, I challenge any of you to drive around your local social housing estate where there's been examples of retrofit. And if you look hard enough, I guarantee you will see some of these things. I do this every morning, taking my kids to school. I see what were bright yellow EWI projects 3 years ago, turning increasingly black from the outside before my eyes. So we need to get on the right mountain, stop climbing the wrong one. We need to industrialize good practice. And here's a picture I've taken pretty much at random from an installer's website of an EWI project that they're very proud of. You can tell they're proud of it because they put it on the homepage of their website. Make up your own mind if it's good or bad. And it's not necessarily easy to tell, is it? I mean, it looks pretty, but it would do, I suppose. There's been an aesthetic improvement, certainly, I would imagine, to what's been there before. But to the expert eye, you look at that and my eyes are drawn to 2 things. One is that the windows have been left in place and not moved in line with the insulation layer. And the other is that we've done nothing about the damp-proof course area below there. So I wouldn't call that good practice. I'd probably call it fairly standard practice in this country at the moment. And what happens with windows when they're left in their existing position? You can see here that the purple rectangle on the right-hand side is the external wall insulation. The left-hand side is the existing wall, and you can see the green rectangle, which is the window, has been left in line, and it's resulted in the thermographic image showing a horrendous thermal bridge. So we're going to have moisture issues and damp there. If you move those windows in line with the insulation, which costs more and is more technically challenging, you eliminate that thermal bridge, you don't get that issue. So we know this now. We know what good practice looks like. We've just got to start scaling it up. Okay, this is a really critical one. PAS 2035 is a British standard. It's about 80 pages long, and it's full of wonderful flowcharts like the one that you're seeing on the right-hand side. They're all like that. It makes them quite inaccessible. So we need to keep it simple, and we need to break it down into simple steps, as we do through our training, and we need to be clear and consistent in the way that we're explaining these things and how it works. Now, I don't have time to go into detail of that now, but I will signpost you to some resources at the end. Now, this person here is our retrofit coordinator. These are the people that we train, and their role is absolutely fundamental. They must be on the customer's side. And what this slide says, the PAS allows a retrofit coordinator to work for multiple types of organisation, everything from chartered surveyors to the installer themselves and domestic energy assessors. There are increasing expertise and cost involved in using people the further right you go on there. But this is where we need to go. Now, a key question for the future is whether we do want those people to be independent of any vested commercial interest or not. Now, that's not where we currently are, but it may be where we have to end up in the future. Whichever way we go, we have to ensure that the ethos that underpins PAS 2035 of being on the customer's side, that we hold people true to that. And Trustmark have got the job of doing that. We're on to the last few now. We must have round pegs in round holes. We must have people who know what they're doing, The sorts of numbers of people we need to bring into the sector. They need appropriate training and qualifications. They also need support into practice, and that's really crucial, because just because somebody holds a qualification doesn't make them competent. That's why we have our Centre of Excellence model. So round pegs, round holes. We need to stick to the plan. Okay, if we're going to have retrofit coordinators creating medium-term plans for properties, let's stick to them. Let's get all these into our Trustmark data warehouse. They belong to the property. They're public domain information. Whoever lives in this property will be able to access these in the future and pick up the next stage of retrofit. So we need to stick to the plan. And last but not least, we need consistent policy. And I'm sure no one on the call would disagree with that. It's very challenging to apply these new standards in legacy programs. The gentleman from NEA at the start talked about Eco 3. We're trying to retrofit, whole house retrofit into Eco 3, which wasn't designed as an Eco 3 scheme. So that's always going to be a challenge. And perhaps it's a better opportunity to prove the worth of the PAS in the LAD scheme and the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which require these standards from the outset. And now it's really important that policy in the future is consistent, and that we have the standards consistently applied across all sorts of government programs. I'd also, looking at the that way side of that sign, counsel that we need to move away from knee-jerk and rushed and shallow programs like the Green Home Grant Voucher Scheme, which really are and have proven counterproductive. A classic example, I think, of climbing the wrong mountain. So those are my 8 steps. As I say, there's much more available on our website for free. There's PAS 2035, a guide to what it is and what does it mean for you. We have compliance process maps available. We also have PAS 2035, the movie. Believe it or not, we're that sad. That tells a story of a local authority and its sort of struggles in putting PAS 2035 into practice, so quite relatable. Thank you very much for your time, and sorry to have run a few minutes over.
You didn't run over. We started a bit late, David, so that was excellent. Thank you. We do have a few minutes available for questions before we conclude. And thank you, panelists, for putting your videos back on. We really wanted to include the information around PAS because, as you've so clearly outlined, it really does provide us with a set of standards which ultimately work to ensure quality for consumers, and that's going to underpin consumer confidence and long-term consumer satisfaction. So really appreciate you taking us through that, and it's really been great to hear about the challenges around the skills sector, both from a very local direct-to-consumer point of view, but also the kind of much wider skills gap in terms of workforce and supply chain. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'm just going to kind of open these up to the panel. One of the first ones, Chris, I'm going to ask you if that's okay. Will you be bringing back the renewables qualification that you used to offer as a City and Guilds qualification?
Yes, it actually never went away. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a victim of COVID, because essentially it is a face-to-face offering. As soon as we can get back into a face-to-face environment, yes, renewables training will still be available. We would look to probably try and kind of recommend people move down the decarbonisation route if you want that little kind of extra higher level kind of knowledge and skills around decarbonisation. But by all means, yeah, the lower level introduction renewables will be available, but unfortunately it can't be, it's so big it can't overly be done on a webinar or an e-learning format just yet.
David, one for you. How does PAS 2035 fit with EPCs and SAP?
Well, very simply, the PAS 2035 recognises that RD-SAP, which is the methodology used to generate EPCs, is a fact. I think a lot of us wish that it wasn't, but it is. It acknowledges that there are weaknesses in that, and that EPC type data is usually insufficient to make the right decisions for a property. So the PAS requires RD-SAP data to be converted into full SAP, which is a bit of a sticking plaster solution, really. What we'd say to retrofit coordinators who are responsible for commissioning surveys under PAS, that they should be using full SAP from the outset, or indeed, as we do when we do the project, using the Passive House Planning Package, PHPP. which gives a much more robust set of information and allows you to make the right decision for the property at the right time.
Fantastic. And I'm not picking on you, but a lot of the questions are on PAS. So I've got another PAS related question, David, if you don't mind. Okay. Is PAS 2035 compulsory for all retrofit works or only for projects installed through government funding schemes?
So it's only government funded schemes or schemes that require it. And just to confuse us, not all government schemes currently do require full adoption of the PAD. For example, the Green Home Grant voucher scheme didn't, whereas the LAD scheme and the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which are part of the Green Home Grant programme, do. So it's even a little piecemeal there. The whole rationale for having Trustmark was to build consumer confidence, and consumers are a very diverse set. So the hope is that in the fullness of time, no one would dream of having a home done retrofitted by anyone who wasn't Trustmark accredited, in the same way you wouldn't have your boiler fiddled with by someone who wasn't gas safe registered. But I think we're quite away from that at the moment.
We have time for one more question, but because it's another PAS 2035 one, I'm just going to say, does anybody have any questions for anybody else on the panel before David never wants to speak at our events again? No more Q&As popping in, so apologies. Last one for you, David. I did say that it would be a hot topic. Trustmark and Bays have confirmed that under PAS 2035, park home installation needs to consist of 3 elements: insulation to the walls, roof and underfloor. This requirement will stop hundreds of jobs going ahead. Is there a solution from a retrofit application to address these cold, damp and poorly insulated homes in the future?
Okay, so I get about 100 emails a week asking questions about PAS 2035. About 10 of them every week are about park homes. Park homes represent a tiny fraction of our building stock, but there's a lot of people who live in those homes who are in fuel poverty, so understandable that local authorities will want to tackle them. There are certainly technical issues with the approach of doing EWI on a park home without also doing the roof or addressing the floors. There are also issues associated with access and working space beneath park homes and fire separation distances and all sorts of things like that. So it's been the subject of extensive discussion and debate. It's one of the areas where we've been talking to Bays quite a lot about this lately, because we absolutely don't want to stop retrofit to park homes if that is going to improve the residents' lives. But it's not something you should rush into simply because there's funding available without it being properly thought through. And that's one of the areas where there's a lack of research, a lack of evidence. There are, is it Duncan who's asked this question? There are 3 or 4 other local authorities who've all contacted me about the same issue. And what I suggest we do is get together and have a conversation with Bays and Trustmark and the powers that be and see if we can work something out. We don't want to stop retrofit. We do want to stop bad retrofit though.
Thank you, David, and thank you again to all of our speakers today. Those in session 2, thank you very, very much, and those also from session 1. I think the challenge has been really well set out through all of the presentations, but hopefully we've also started the discussion around good practice, practical tips of how we can make things work. We recognise that this is an ongoing discussion. It's a big discussion and it's much bigger than just 2.5 hours of the day. We were slightly tackling the constraints of being in a COVID world, and online sometimes being in a session all day can be just a bit much for people, but what we would really invite everybody that's on the call to do is let us know if there are key themes that you'd like us to take a deeper dive into. There have some that have fallen out from the nature of the Q&A, so there will be some that we will be recommending, particularly to members in the first instance, as areas that we can consult with them on. And this is where my role as chair and speaker sort of becomes a little bit blurred, but just to reiterate my earlier point, we want to use, we know we can use the focus of decarbonisation to truly help and support people living in fuel poverty and make a life-changing difference. But if you want to talk to us about some of our insights or work with us, please do just get in touch. All of the slides will be made available. We will also circulate Q&A as best as possible. We'll try and go through those and answer what we can and circulate a complete list. There's also been a number of offers of support or partnership working or engagement within the chat. So providing nobody contacts us with an explicit request not to share those, we will aim to also share a summary note of those so that fellow delegates can get in touch with people if it's relevant to them. Just to mention, we're going to be continuing to put on online events. We do have a National Fuel Poverty Forum at the end of April, so more information will be coming out. And more broadly, even outside of this agenda, if there's any key things that you want to hear about from us or updates from us, just let us know, and we will see how we can perhaps plot those into a digital event series as well. Thank you, everybody. Your participation has been extraordinary. It's been brilliant to see all the Q&A flurry coming in. That shows that everybody's been engaged, which is brilliant from the speaker's perspective as well. So I really, really appreciate all of your time today. And thank you once again to all the speakers. Take care all. Bye.
Thank you, Dan.